Welcome to the What Was Good podcast. On this episode, we'll be talking about the top-grossing movie, music album, and book of 2003. We will take a look at Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, 50 Cent's first album, Get Rich or Die Tryin', and Dan Brown's cultural phenomenon, The Da Vinci Code. We will also be discussing the Tom Hanks movie based on the Da Vinci Code. If you would like to get a hold of us, feel free to reach out on X, formerly Twitter, at whatwasgoodpod, or by email, whatwasgoodpod@gmail.com. Now, let's get right into our discussion about 2003.
What up, gangsta? Welcome to 2003.
I feel like there's probably a certain response I'm supposed to give you, but not sure if I actually want to do that or not. I mean, I could say, what up, blood?
We can bake that one in later.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to the What Was Good pod, everybody.
Yeah. Hi. Like you said, 2003. This is a big year, I guess. I guess every year is a big year if you look at things from that perspective. But yeah, I'm ready. I'm hyped because I actually am aware of all this stuff, and it was in my lifetime that can still recall, not just like way back in my childhood, but something that is not too far off memory.
Well, that's the weird thing, though, is like this was 21 years ago. I have very, very clear memories of 2003. That happens to be the year that my first child was born, so it kind of sticks in your head. But it's weird that it's 21 years, man. I'm not ready for that.
No, man, I was thinking, I was in college at this point, and it feels like that wasn't that long ago, but it's been over 2 decades now, and that's insane. But here we are, 2024 now, so.
Here we are, 2024. I'm sitting in my basement to record my recently flooded basement.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I woke up Tuesday morning, take a shower, get ready to go to work, and the water's not turning hot. It usually takes a while to turn hot, right? Because my bathrooms are on the far side of the house from the water heater. Wait a couple minutes. Wait like 3 minutes, like 4 minutes. It's not hot. What is going on? And then it pops into my head like, uh-oh. The hot water heater was like 17 years old when we bought the house.
Oh, no.
Which was a while ago. So I'm like, oh, no. This is not what I need on a Tuesday morning. I go downstairs, and sure enough, there's 40 gallons of water that have just completely drained out of the tank all over the floor.
Oh.
And, of course, the valve is still open, so it's still trying to refill.
Oh, no. So it's getting more water as you speak.
So, I quickly turn off the valve, get out the shop vac, and take like 6 or 7 trips of 4 or 5 gallons of water up the stairs, dump it in the driveway, but I still don't have hot water. Here it is Friday, and I'm still without.
So is there something in the works for getting that fixed?
Yeah, so I had to fly to Detroit for a couple of days this week. So Wednesday and Thursday I was out of town. I get back today, and the guys came over, and of course there's more problems because this is an ancient house. It's a great privilege to be a homeowner. But if you can avoid...
It's a great responsibility, too.
Well, it's just a great bank account drain, I guess. I don't know how to do any of this stuff. I don't know how to properly vent a gas-powered hot water heater to code.
Come on, you haven't been trained on that? I thought that came with the rights of home ownership.
I do have a credit card, and that's as good as training. Because then I can just pay Jeremy and a couple other guys to come in and do all the work for me. That's my big plans for tomorrow.
Oh, that sounds real exciting. See, my family's getting ready to head to a kind of, I guess, a family reunion on my wife's side. It's just her and her brother and her parents and all the kids involved with that. But we're headed to the beach for a few days, so we're abandoning our house and headed to someone else's house at the beach. Just like an Airbnb type thing.
Well, I hope you don't have any catastrophes at your house while you're gone.
Yeah, hopefully not. We're not even letting the cat stay inside. She has to be outside the whole time.
Oh, nice.
So no torn up couches or anything. So we did have 2 cats in our house because we have been fostering a cat for the last 2 months. And when we got this cat, it weighed 17 pounds.
Okay, I'm not a cat person. Is that a lot or a little?
That, like, it looked like, I don't even know how to describe what it looked like, but it looked like these little twig legs with a watermelon sitting on top of it. It was a very, very large cat. That's just the best way I can describe her.
Okay, I guess I have picked up a cat before, and now I'm thinking 17 pounds. That thing, yeah, that's enormous.
Our other cat that actually lives at our house, she's a smaller cat, but she only weighs 7 pounds. So huge difference.
So you've had this cat on a little kitty diet then?
Yeah, so we actually, knowing that we were going to be gone this weekend, and we've had her for two and a half months or so. So we decided it was time to send her back to the no-kill shelter where we were fostering from. And they emailed us today and said that, well, we had her, she lost 2.5 pounds. So it pretty incredibly that's a lot of weight considering body size there. So we did our job and got her down a little bit, and hopefully someone else will adopt her. She's an older cat too, so less likely to be adopted, but hopefully it still happens.
Is there such a thing as kitty diabetes?
You know, I actually know for a fact there is, because this cat was considered pre-diabetic. Yeah.
Oh,
so
can you imagine having
it's a real thing.
Having to give like insulin shots to a cat every day? What a nightmare.
This one didn't even like coming out from under the bed for the first month and a half it lived here. So we did have to give it some medication, some glucose medicine, but not a shot, just like with her wet food, she would have to have this medicine. So, yep, pre-diabetic, and we had to help take care of that.
Well, that's very generous and kind of you to care for animals like that.
Yeah, well, my daughter just loves cats.
That's true. I've seen her imitate a cat many times. She does a great cat impression, I will say.
Okay, yeah, she does. So one other note before we get going here.
Sure.
My wife got some mail this week that had giant phallus on it. It was so weird that neither of us were shocked or even surprised that she got that.
That's weird that you weren't shocked.
Well, because it had your handwriting on the back. It was her birthday earlier this month, so she got a postcard from you that had the Washington Monument on it.
Oh, yes, she did. Okay. I was like, wait a minute. I may be something of an idiot, but I wouldn't do that.
No. I guess that's not really what the Washington Monument is, but, you know, the joke was there, so.
Well, when you look at the symbology of it, as a Harvard symbologist might say, you know, there's maybe some connection there. Speaking of mail, though, we actually got another email.
We did. That's right.
There was no request for a postcard. Again, remember, if you want a postcard from me like this, I may not have another one with the Washington Monument on it, but if you want me to handwrite you a postcard, just send us an email at whatwasgoodpod@gmail.com with your mailing address, obviously, and I'll put one in the mail for you. So this one didn't come with a mailing address, but I have it because it came from our father.
It did. And he wasn't crazy about my take about driving Miss Daisy.
Well, I mean, I don't think he's
Neither am I, though.
I don't think he's even seen the movie, has he? He just said that nothing with Morgan Freeman in it can be less than a B. And, you know.
Yeah. I get the love for Morgan Freeman. I love Morgan Freeman as well, and he did really well in that movie. It was just the movie as a whole wasn't my cup of tea so much. But I think there's other Morgan Freeman movies that might not deserve a B as well. But where that's for another date, another time, another year maybe. I'm sure we'll see him pop up within our discussions throughout time.
He's been in a lot of movies. And the other thing that was included in that email was a little bit more context about the Dr. Zhivago double feature that I talked about my parents seeing for 49 cents back in 1970. So they saw Dr. Zhivago and Paint Your Wagon as a double feature for 49 cents. And just a little more context about that is that the average movie ticket price then was $2.50. So not only was this a double feature, it was also 1/5 the price of a regular ticket. So we're talking 10 times as much movie per dollar as you would normally
Impressive.
get then. And I feel like that's what we've got to talk about this week, too, because today we're talking about the top grossing movies of 2003. And the top grossing one was Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. And I don't care how much you spend, you get 10 times your money's worth.
Well, but it's only 1/3 of the movie. So if you go to a triple feature with all three, extended version, you're looking at like 13 hours of movies. Even more than that, probably.
I think a little bit more. I've actually got a friend who lives here in Virginia who every year on his birthday, they watch all three in a row.
That's a full day's worth.
Yeah, we were invited over for all three, did not make it to all three. You completely lose a Saturday, and it wasn't my birthday. So I couldn't justify with the lawn to mow and all that. But we did make it for the Return of the King. So I've now watched this movie twice in the last month.
Impressive. It's quite a commitment, actually. The theatrical version that we were looking at for this episode is about 3.5 hours. Correct? Or like a little over 3 hours?
A little over 3, yeah.
Yeah. So even the theatrical version is quite the commitment.
Yeah. I guess we're just going to get into it then, right?
Yeah, we might as well. I kind of want to preface this here that the last note I wrote down about this movie, I feel like I want to say I'm going to do some nitpicking only because I feel like I have to have something to say about this that isn't just glowing praise. So I'm going to do a little nitpicking, but that's just to have more to say about it.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. So before we dive right into the movie, I think for those of us that were not around in 2003, 21 years ago, if there's any listeners that we have that are in that boat, just to set a little context. So 2003 was just a couple years after 9/11. Of course, we were at war in the Middle East. George W. Bush was the president. There was a lot of political arguments, I'd say, at the time, which I guess compared to now is like the good old days. But
yeah, good old days of political discussion.
Yeah, it had gotten pretty intense. I kind of didn't pay that much attention to, say, the back half of the year because my son was born in October of 2003. And so for those of you that have had a kid, once the last month of pregnancy and then the newborn days roll around, you kind of you're lost. I have no idea what was going on then, except for two things that happened on the day my son was born that made me think the whole day was a dream. So first, Arnold Schwarzenegger was elected governor of California.
Oh, that's right.
Which seems
forgot about that.
Crazy at the time. It was like, what's the Terminator doing as governor? And then second, there was a Cubs fan named Steve Bartman who, in the playoffs, reached over the fence to grab what should have been an out for the Cubs to seal the game. But instead he caught it and it was a home run and the other team won. I think it was the Cardinals. But I remember watching that in the hospital, holding my newborn son, thinking this cannot be real. What is going on? It was the craziest time for me personally.
Now, you weren't in Michigan at that point in time, were you?
No, I was in the lovely small town of Moses Lake, Washington.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. You went to Michigan a little bit later on, but the Detroit Tigers that year were historically bad. They had to win their last game to not tie the worst record in baseball history that year. So there's another little piece of 2003 sports trivia for you.
That's a good tidbit. Now, did you see this movie in the theater when it came out?
Yes, I believe I did. Oh man, like you said, this was 21 years ago. It's so ingrained in so much of those years, all three movies from the early 2000s, that it was just a part of life back then, it felt like. So I can't remember specifically seeing this one in theaters, but I'm 95% certain I did.
Yeah, I know that I did because my wife and I had to take turns. Because we couldn't, we weren't going to leave a 2-month-old baby. This movie came out in December. We weren't going to leave our 2-month-old baby with some stranger, not even a friend. So I think she went with some friends first, and then the next night I went with some friends to see it. Man, I think
Well, yeah, it came out December 17th in the US.
Yeah, there's a chance, given the situation, I may have fallen asleep at the theater, but I don't think so.
That would be completely understandable, though, with a newborn at home.
Yeah.
But when you think about that, it came out December 17th, and it was the top grossing movie of the year.
Well, okay, let's be specific about that, right? It did not make the most money in calendar year 2003.
Okay, fair enough, yeah.
That was Finding Nemo. But of all the movies that came out in calendar year 2003, it ended up with the highest box office total.
Do you happen to have that total?
I had it written down, but I can't find it. I think it was about 370 million. Domestic.
Oh, I have a much different... Okay, I was going to say, I have the worldwide gross.
Okay, and that was close to $1 billion, wasn't it?
It was over $1 billion, $1.15 billion. The highest grossing of the three movies as well, so that makes sense, considering it was a conclusion. But just insane numbers.
That's a lot of dollars.
That's very many dollars, yes. It makes me not know how to speak English when I think about numbers that big, but...
Yeah.
But so, yeah, this was like a cultural phenomenon, well, we were only looking at Return of the King, which is the conclusion of the three movies or three books. These were all recorded as or filmed as one giant movie, which makes them so much more consistent throughout, and not just as sequels that were made after the fact. These were all filmed together, and that, I think, that makes these movies so much more appealing than prequels and sequels. So that was a huge part of why this one in particular made so much money, and as we're going to find out, also won the award for Best Picture that year. So,
along with many other awards.
Yo, I've got a whole list of them here. I wrote those down just to make sure we don't miss out on anything.
So, thinking back, like, I'm glad you brought up the point that all three of these were basically made or filmed before the first one even came out. It just boggles my mind that these pictures even exist. Like, Peter Jackson was a relatively well-known director at this point. He'd done things like The Frighteners and, of course, his early movies like Bad Taste. But he wasn't the huge star that he became. And so New Line Cinemas was willing to take this leap and entirely pre-fund all three movies. And
which is crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy, and it paid off, I think, probably better than anybody could have imagined. It's just what an incredible thing that this series exists as it does.
And I think the biggest accomplishment was that it made Lord of the Rings fans satisfied. It told the story that they were looking for, like, to a T. And like we've talked about other movies that are based on books, where it's like, well, yeah, it had the same story, but it was missing so many details and the parts were left out. These movies didn't do that. There was like everything. I mean, I'm sure there's a few small details that were left out, but everything that you would hope for as an enjoyer of the book series, you got in this movie. And it's just astounding how much there is that went into all of this. It was just mind-boggling.
What else is mind-boggling is the size of the cast of these movies.
Not just the stars, but like how many people, yeah.
Right, but even the ones whose names we all know, there's so many of them. We've got, obviously Elijah Wood as Frodo, Rudy as Samwise Gamgee.
Yeah, we got Viggo Mortensen, Ian McKellen, Orlando Bloom, Liv Tyler. I mean, there's all like so many names that you recognize. Cate Blanchett, Billy Boyd. Well, not quite as recognizable necessarily, but there's so many big stars in this movie, and then a ton of other cast as
So
well.
I just realized that Billy Boyd is the same guy that plays in The Boys, right? He plays Aomer,
Okay.
and he also plays in the Amazon show The Boys. Totally different characters, but once I realized that, and I was watching Return of the King, I was like, oh, that is the kind of crazy maniac guy from the TV.
I think that's more impressive to not be typecast and just be able to play a lot of different roles. I think so many actors are put into one role, like they have a role that's kind of defines them, and then they only play roles that are similar to that. And so it's pretty impressive when someone can break out of that and just do all sorts of different kinds of roles.
Did you mention John Rhys Davies? I don't think you did.
I did. I was writing names down. I decided I can only write so many names down before I just sound like I'm rambling on.
So what's fun to look at is, so John Rhys Davies was in these 3 movies. He was also Sala in the Indiana Jones movies. So he's been a major character in 2 monstrous trilogies. Orlando Bloom, at the same time he was in these movies, he was in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Like, it's hard to remember how big of a star he was at the time. He was everywhere.
Right. Man, I forgot about that.
So he probably never had to work a day again in his life, but he's, actors probably want to keep acting, so he does. But man, I can't even imagine being in those 2 series at the same time.
Yeah, man. Yeah, and I mean, I haven't heard his name much recently, but this was, like you said, 21 years ago, so it's a lot can change in that time. But yeah, so many good actors, and the movie was just so good. Now, like I said, I'm going to nitpick a little bit only because I have to have more to say other than the movie was really good. It was filmed well. The production was great. The scenery was amazing. I got to have more to say than just glowing praise all the time. So I guess my first, not even criticism, it's that it was hard for me to step into this being the concluding movie, the third part, because I haven't watched these movies in a couple years now. And so to step in and only watch the end of it was a challenge. I mean, obviously I still enjoyed it, but it was hard to get into the middle of a story and try to remember everything that happened before that led up to this point. So that's more of a criticism of our format than it is in the movie in itself. So that's just it's not really anything to do with the movie, but I struggled a little bit, like, wait, who are they talking about? Who's this character? Who does she love? What? But I mean, it's still so epic that you're like, okay, not all the details matter at this point because it's just so much fun and like pleasing to watch.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I think I probably watched these movies more recently than you. But what I did like is they didn't just jump right into the action and just throw you.
No.
Like, it wasn't like Karate Kid 2 that starts the minute after Karate Kid 1 ends and you're just right back there. I actually really enjoyed the opening scene with Smeagol and Deagle sometime in the ancient past when the ring was first found. It sort of slowly ramps you back up into this world and gives you the scope of how much time has passed and exactly what is going on with this ring and how it got to be where it is, and got me in the mood. Sorry, that sounds weird.
Okay, that's fair.
But it pulled me right back
that.
in. It pulled me right back into the universe, and I've seen these enough times that it was, super easy to pick back up. Oh yeah, okay. Frodo and Sam and Gollum are almost to Mordor. They're traipsing their last way there. These guys just conquered Isengard with the Ents. Merry and Pippin. Got you right back in there for me, and I really think without that opening, it would have been much harder.
Yeah, and I think that opening really speaks to the director Peter Jackson and the production of this. It is just so flawlessly done that you can be sucked right back into the middle of a movie without even missing that much of a beat. So I just struggled because it had been too long since I had watched the movie. So that was just me.
I do think this is the first time I've watched the theatrical cut since it was in theaters. And so pretty quickly, I probably watched the extended edition a dozen times over the last
Yeah.
20 years. And I'm so used to that one that when you get to this scene right at the beginning, when Gandalf and Gimli and Legolas and everybody finally get to Isengard, there's this whole scene with Saruman on the top of the tower, and he ends up dying and falling off, and there's Grima Worm. None of that's in this.
Hmm. Well, it's an extra hour of footage.
Right, and most of it I didn't miss in particular, but this one was shocking. All of a sudden, they're just finding the Seeing Stone, the Palantir in the water, and off they go. And I'm like, what happened with Saruman? And at first, it bothered me, but as the movie went on, I think the theatrical cut is better as a movie.
Interesting. Just because the extended version just carries on too much, do you think?
Well, I think the momentum gets slowed down by some of those scenes. Like the one with Saruman. I love all the extra content, so I love watching the extended edition. But as a movie, this one works better because you don't get bogged down in this long conversation where they're just talking back and forth. Similar thing at the end when they get to the Black Gate at Mordor. The extended edition has this long scene where the mouth of Sauron comes out and talks to them. It doesn't happen in the theatrical cut. The theatrical cut jumps right to the battle with Aragorn yelling, "For Frodo!" and they all charge. And it is so thrilling that the momentum just carries you forward right into this battle without getting slowed down, and I think it works better.
I think you just hinted at probably one of the most important aspects of this movie, the battle scenes. And I think the second one, like the Isengard battle with the Ents and everything, like you mentioned, was probably one of the most epic battle scenes I've ever seen. And in this one, there's a couple different huge battles with all the orcs. And the way they're shown and presented, oh, man, I was so immersed in watching all of these different things, all these elements coming together with the different orcs and the dead and the humans and then eagles. There's just all these things coming together, and it's just, I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. It's just a feast, really. That's the best way to put it, I think. And I think what works so well is that Peter Jackson, I'm sorry, used a lot of people and there's not just obviously like the orcs, some of the stuff, the Oliphants and everything are all CGI, but there was so many actual people there doing the acting that it just seemed so realistic and just engrossing that, yeah, I just couldn't, those battle scenes were just amazing. That's the only way I can put it.
The culminating battle on the plains of the Pelennor is probably my favorite battle scene in all of cinema that I've seen. And part of what makes it work so well, what you talked about is absolutely right. But the movie has done such a good job up until that point of making it seem kind of hopeless. Like there's no chance that they're going to be able to defeat these orcs, but they have to fight anyway. So you've got the scene where, Faramir and his squad get massacred, and the orcs are launching decapitated heads back into the city. It's just this terror, and you're like, yeah, we have no chance, but we have to fight anyway. And so when you get to that scene of the Rohirrim just screaming, "Death! Death!" before they charge down the hill, man. It just gives me chills every time because it's like we're all going to our doom, but we're doing it anyway because we're men and we have to go out fighting. It's just so awesome.
And a quick aside on that note, I thought my son might like to watch that scene, or like the battle scene. So I paused the movie and invited him to watch a little bit with me. The first scene that comes back on when he joins me is them catapulting heads over the wall.
Oh no.
He was like, "I'm not sure I want to watch this."
Yeah.
So, but his biggest problem, he didn't watch that much of it with me, but his thing he didn't really like was Gollum. He's like, that guy is too creepy. He's gonna give me nightmares.
Fair.
Yeah,
Right?
that was that was a huge step in technology, or like CGI technology, having Gollum, because it was like one of the first times I believe that they were using like motion capture for, and then translating it into
Okay.
this character. And I mean, it's creepily human, but or not, or Hobbit or whatever it is. And
Halfling or
yeah, it's such a creepy character, but it's exactly what it's supposed to be. Yeah, just thinking about him is like, yeah, I could see how that would scare most little kids.
yeah. So if I'm gonna nitpick something, and it's not just about the movie, I guess this is kind of a nitpick about the book series too, is the never-ending Gollum, Frodo, Sam track. Like, if they lose the ring, the story's over, right? So you know they're not going to, even the first time you're seeing this or reading it. And it just goes on and on. And so you like, oh no, Frodo got killed by a giant spider. Obviously something's still going to get fixed, right? Because the movie's not over. And so
Yeah.
that's just inherent in the story, I guess. There's nothing you can do about it. But if I were to nitpick something, it's that part is not nearly as interesting, though it does get extremely heart-wrenching and touching at times, but it's not as
It does.
momentous, I guess.
Yeah, and it's just a lot of build up to what you eventually know is going to happen. I mean, that's just how you know the story is going to work out that way.
Although the very details of how it happens at the end is just so good. Because I think if you go back to, it's either the first movie or the second movie at the very beginning when Gandalf says something. Oh, it must be the first movie because he's gone for most of the second movie because he falls into the chasm or the off the bridge of Khazad Dûm, where he says something that he thinks that Gollum has a part to play in this story yet. And so the fact that he's there at the very end and he gets what he wants right as he's dying, it's a really good way to do the end. It just takes a long time to get there.
Yeah, it's definitely a long, drawn out process for sure.
So I've talked about the Bridge of Khazad Dûm and the Battle of the Pelennor and Minas Tirith, and I'm realizing there's no way to talk about this movie without sounding like a colossal nerd.
That's very true. I mean,
but yet it was an enormous hit. Like, it was not just a nerdy thing.
No, it wasn't. I mean, I think it was such a hit because of how well it was done. The story is, I mean, it's an amazing story anyway, and so well told, whether it's the book or the movie. It's just so well told that you don't have to be a fan to really appreciate how good it is. That's just, yeah. I mean, obviously, it was much adored. I think we mentioned on our last episode that this movie was nominated for 11 different Academy Awards and won every single one of them.
That's incredible.
Yeah, like we said, it took out Gigi as the most nominations, or like that won the most nominations that it was. How do I put this? It won all of them that it was nominated for, and Gigi had been nominated for 9 and won them all, and now this one had been nominated for 11 and won them all. Now, mind you, there are 2 other movies that have won 11 awards, but they were nominated for even more than that, but didn't win them all. This won every single thing.
What are the other 2 that have been nominated that won 11 awards?
So Ben-Hur in 1959 was nominated for 12, and it won 11 of them.
Okay.
So pretty similar. And Titanic 97 was nominated for, I believe it was 14 and won 11. So it's tied for the most wins of all time.
So I haven't seen Ben-Hur, although we will watch it for this podcast. And I have seen Titanic, which we will also watch for this. And, you know, I'm okay with these movies being in the same category together.
I think so. I mean, they were like I said, I can't speak for Ben-Hur either, but for Titanic, I think that was That was a cultural phenomenon, just like this was. But this one just had 3 movies.
Best Picture. What were the other 10?
So we had, Best Picture, Best Director, Adapted Screenplay, Original Score, which was amazing, mind you. Howard Shore did the music. Score was amazing.
That's one of the few scores that I'll just listen to. I don't usually listen to movie scores, but I will listen to this one.
Yeah, it's astounding. So should have won that one for sure. Original song goes right along with that. Best visual effects, no surprise there. Best art direction, none of these are surprising at all to read through the list and see what they've won. Best costume design, best makeup, best sound mixing, best film editing. I mean, you hear that and go, yep, yeah, of course, yeah. All of those things make perfect sense. Next episode we'll look at some of the other nominees, but it doesn't even matter, it feels like, because this movie was just so good, so epic, and so engrossing that it just deserved everything that people wanted to give it, or awards it won.
Do you think they were kind of saving up for the third movie? Because I know the first 2 did not win Best Picture, didn't win nearly as many awards. So do you think they were like, all right, these are obviously great, but we can't just give all the awards to Lord of the Rings for 3 years in a row?
I feel like there might have been some sense of that. No, they had to know, like when the first 2 movies came out, when they started rolling out, they had to know that there were going to be all 3 of them coming. And so they might have just said, let's just give all those awards to this one, because the other ones were just as well made. And I know they won some awards, but neither of them won Best Picture for the year they were released.
Right.
So it might be that, but there's also some really good competition for those other movies in 2001 and 2002. So I don't know. The competition in 2003 was pretty good as well, but it could be that they just wanted to. They knew they were coming, and like, all right, let's just pile it on for the conclusion here.
So, any other nitpicks you have? You said you've only mentioned one, I think.
Okay, see, like I said, everything I have, like the only thing is I have are nitpicks, and I don't even have many of those. But comparing like the CGI in the movie to modern CGI, you can tell how much we progressed and how impressive computer graphics are nowadays. Because there are still scenes throughout the movies where things got distorted a little bit. Like the one that's in my mind right now is where Frodo was running into Mount Doom, like into the volcano, and it looks like his body bends in a weird way. But hey, maybe that's just the heat shaping things into a little bit differently. And you know how you see things when they look hot, it looks like. So it could just be that. But there was a few times where it just felt like, okay, yeah, they were still experimenting with some graphic stuff. I mean, still nowadays they're still trying to master everything, and it's never going to be mastered. But honestly, that was the only other nitpick. There was still astounding CGI for what was available to them and they used at the time. So really, there's not many negative things you can say about this movie at all.
The only other one that I have is, and of course, again, this is just inherent in the story, is the 4, 5, maybe 6 different endings.
Okay.
There's just one ending, and then, then they're back in, what's the, Rivendell. And then and Frodo gets to see everybody, and there's another ending, and then they go to Minas Tirith and get bowed to, which is another, like, I tear up every time I watch that scene when the king of Gondor says, "My friends, you bow to no one."
And everybody bows to them.
And so you think, what a beautiful ending. And then they go back to the Shire, and like, oh, what a beautiful ending. They're back there in the prancing pony having a ale, or the green dragon. I can't remember what the name.
The green dragon,
The green dragon. Like, oh, what a great ending. And then Frodo and Bilbo go off to the Grey Havens to sail to the Valyria or the West or whatever. Like, oh, Frodo had to say goodbye. What a great ending. And then they're back in the Shire and Sam gets married and you're like, okay, can we just wrap it up?
Yeah, it did feel like the last 20 minutes of the movie were, okay, yeah, it's over. I mean, they completed their mission. Let's Let's go.
I mean, you do want to see, after spending 12 hours or whatever with these characters, you do want to see everybody get their happy-ish ending. And so, I get it, but maybe if you were watching it at the end of all three in a row, it wouldn't feel so dragged on. But since we just watched this third one, it's, more than 10% of the movie is just them saying goodbye over and over.
Yeah, I understand that nitpick, but again, like, we're just nitpicking at this point.
Right. I watch it to the bitter end every time.
Oh, absolutely. Well, okay, I can't say I watched all the credits, but
yeah.
So, do I even need to ask what kind of grade do you give this?
I mean, it's an A, right? It has to be.
It's an A. Yeah. I don't see how you could give it anything else. Anybody that says otherwise can email us or catch us on X, and
they're just trying to disagree because they're disagreeable.
Yeah, they're just trying to start something.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't give it anything but an A.
No, you can't. And if anybody, yeah, it's one of the best movies or series, I guess, of all times, and it's just amazing.
And it's an achievement in filmmaking I don't know that we'll ever see again. That kind of epic scale.
I don't think, well, I mean, I hope to someday, but I'm not holding my breath because it was just that good.
To be fair, the first two Dune movies are giving it a run for its money, I will say.
Okay.
Huge fan of those.
We'll see how it all plays. See, but those aren't being filmed as one movie, though.
Right. Yeah.
It's a different scenario, but I mean, it doesn't mean they're not good at all.
Right.
Yeah.
So, wow. What an epic movie. What an epic start to our 2003 episode. What's next?
So, I guess we have to talk about some music now, don't we? And I think this is a little bit different than what we've kind of looked at before.
Just a smidge.
The album we're looking at that was the top grossing album for 2003 was 50 Cent's Get Rich or Die Trying. And it was quite the shock to go from Henry Mancini to 50 Cent from one episode to the next. Yeah, and so I was, just to kind of preface this a little bit, I was in college at this time, and I was in rural Oregon for college. I was going Eastern Oregon for college. So you can imagine the population, a lot of farmers, a lot of like rural country kids that were going to this college. And yet 50 Cent's Get Rich and Die Trying and his other music was a phenomenon on our campus. I remember everybody like knowing about it and having the album. So I didn't quite understand. I wasn't part of that really, but I didn't quite understand what the appeal was to these kids that had no connection to what he's singing about, essentially. But that's something happened that caused him to be a cultural phenomenon. And I think we're going to maybe try to touch on that a little bit, see if we can figure it out ourselves.
So I was not in rural Oregon at the time, and I was not in college. I had a kid that year, so my memory of this is sketchy at best. I do remember hearing Into Club everywhere.
Yes, for sure.
It was omnipresent in 2003. Most of my music that I was listening to in 2003 was like, I don't know what you want to call it, lo-fi, garage, indie rock downloaded from LimeWire. Like, I mean,
oh man, we're dating ourselves.
Like the Strokes or Kings of Leon's first album, which is fantastic, much better than what they would go on to do later when they sounded like wannabe U2. Got Franz Ferdinand in there. The Darkness's first album, Permission to Land, one of the greatest of all time. So this is what I was listening to in 2003. So completely different from what was going on in pop culture. I was just kind of like on my own thing, getting ready to have a kid.
So really, this is gangster rap, and I've never really listened to any kind of gangster rap at all. I've been aware of and listened to hip hop and some rap, but gangster rap was never really on my radar. And when I listened to this album, it was really hard for me to get into it because it's so far removed. What he's singing about and rapping about is so far removed from my experiences that it was a struggle to try to understand even what was happening in a lot of these songs. So, I mean, obviously, I listened to the whole thing and tried to figure out as much as I could about it, but it was hard for me. This album was probably the toughest thing we've looked at so far for me to really get into and try to understand and figure out.
Well, there's definitely not more than like perhaps 15 words in a row that we can quote and still get that that clean notification on Apple Podcasts. So that's very different. But this is going to sound weird, but more than anything else, this reminded me of Britney Spears.
You're absolutely right. That sounds weird.
So you look at the cover of this album and it's Fitty, completely ripped, no shirt, bullet hole in the glass in the front, and you're like, this is a product. This is a character that's being sold to us. This is not a real person. This is like a superhero. And in fact, the very first words out of his mouth on the album were, "People look at me like I got an S on my chest." And that just unlocked it for me. Like, this is not, I mean, if you look at his history, sure, like there was some truth, some authenticity to this, but this is a character being sold by the music industry to suburban kids around the country. Just like Britney Spears. She was a character. She was the, first the little pop singer debutante, and then she got a little bit sexier as she got older. And so this is exactly the same kind of thing, and that freed me up to listen to what was being sold, I guess, is how I feel about it. This is just a comic book character that we're listening to brag and tell the story, like the background of a Frank Miller Batman era, or Batman Frank Miller era villain.
I like that take. I think you're absolutely right. And I think what was being sold here was not necessarily the content of what he was saying, but the beat that was happening. Now, mind you, all these songs are pretty simplistic beats, but I was listening to just the instrumental version of this as well. And my wife walked in and instantly started dancing when it was in the club was playing. And because that's just what it was. It was a beat that you were hearing. And I actually looking at just the instrumental part of it. It's each song, every single song, all of the songs on this album were just a loop of the same beat, which I get for rap. And so that's very simplistic, but it's got that beat that you can bob your head along with. I was on a 2-hour drive yesterday and I was listening to this and I caught myself several times just kind of bobbing along with the music. Like, okay, yeah, I get this. I get the beat. I get why some of the appeal to this. But I think the lyrics and the content of what he's saying, that turns me off a little bit because that's so far outside my experience. I don't even know where to start with it. But yeah, it was being a product being sold is what, like, kind of like what you said. He's just this persona essentially.
Yeah, and I think part of the appeal. So you talked about being in rural Oregon and with a bunch of farmers and actual cowboys, people that ride horses for real.
Literally.
This is what they do. Being popular even there. I think a lot of that is, the whole thing is kind of a power fantasy. This is a guy with money, with power, who's been shot 9 times, and this is actually real, and like practically back from the dead. Again, that superhero. This is the kind of thing that suburban kids in their lives, they don't have this kind of power. So it's this dream of like, yeah, somebody like this. I could do this, and you get a bunch of wangstas then, which are annoying in middle school, but a lot of people go through that. But I think that was a lot of the appeal, is just this aggression that you don't really get to do in regular life.
Yeah, I think that's well put. So this album got me looking back a little bit more at a little bit more of the history of hip hop and rap a little bit. So it got me this got me digging, and it was kind of interesting to look back and hear some of the songs that were considered kind of breakthrough for hip hop or rap and it feels like much like any music genre, but maybe even more so, it was kind of just telling about their life circumstances. That's true of every kind of music, I guess, but I felt like this was more an American take on things and not so much a world take on things. This was about the streets in the U.S. and unfortunately, with 50 Cent's music, a lot of that, all the negativity comes out in that. But it's just these guys telling their story. And one of the songs I was listening to was the Grandmaster Flash's "The Message," which is by some people considered one of the best rap songs of all time. But I'm not going to make an opinion on that one way or the other. But it was just telling about life on the street and how hard things were and how it's a struggle for these guys to get by. And I think 50 Cent's take on this is that it's obviously evolved a lot from the 80s or 70s whenever hip hop kind of got its start. And it's evolved a lot to almost to an extreme extent. Like these songs singing about shooting people or killing people or just constantly doing drugs. I don't necessarily like that evolution, but it feels like it's gone a long way from where it started. But they're still just telling their story is all it is.
It's tough because obviously these are exaggerated tales. They're not
I think
literally true. And so obviously he needs to have this kind of authenticity. And if anybody does, it's 50 Cent, but there's this fine line to toe between the authenticity and the exaggeration. There's this one song, I think it's called Heat, which is one of my favorites on the album. I love I love the way it sounds, where he talks about like, oh, the DA is going to play this recording in this tape in court because he's talking about all these crimes he's committed. So clearly that's an exaggeration, but it's a really interesting case right now because I don't know if you've heard of Young Thug.
Yes.
So he's being charged with like a RICO, like organized crime stuff down in Atlanta by the DA, and they're using his lyrics as evidence in court. And so it brings up this really, really weird and tough to deal with idea between what you're allowed to say as part of a character and how that's going to be interpreted. There's this podcast that I listened to called Reflector, who did a two-part episode on exactly that kind of stuff, and it was just a really fascinating listen to. And so to hear 50 Cent talking about the same thing 20 years ago, it's always been there.
So okay, to kind of move along with that, I think looking at skill wise, I think 50 Cent is pretty simplistic with his lyrics. It's pretty smooth and pretty straightforward. There's no crazy beats that or anything. There's no like really fast rapping or anything. It's pretty slow and smooth. The thing that got me was on the song, I think it was Patiently Waiting. Is that the one that featured Eminem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just how much more Eminem enunciated his lyrics. That made it more interesting to listen to. And I know with all the 50 Cent songs on here, it's a little, I can't always understand what he's saying. And there's some of the other featured artists throughout the album tend to be a little clearer with their rapping and lyrics. So that was a struggle for me trying to figure out everything that was going on within the song. But I think even though he signed with Eminem, I think this was made on the Shady somehow he's connected to Eminem, but
I think this album was a co-sign with Eminem Shady Productions and Dr. Dre's production company.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, but it's just like there's I don't want to say that Eminem is a better rapper because that's not a fair take either. But I just wish I could understand what 50 Cent was saying more. That's just personal preference.
It's interesting because Eminem was clearly already an enormous star at this point. He'd had the biggest album the year before, but he kind of had this, I don't want to say opinion or impression of this goofy rap. It was almost a joke.
Yeah.
And so I think he's featured on 2 songs on this album, and I kind of see it as very symbiotic. Being on Fiddy's album gives him more street cred, but he's also a huge name that will bring people in to this. So I totally get why they wanted to work together. Is they're both help each other out, and I think it works. But yeah, I kind of agree about 50 Cent's rapping. It's very like quarter note, 8th note, 16th note, 32nd note.
Yeah, very easily dividable.
There's none of the extremely fast stuff. There's none of the weird offbeat stuff that you get with some other groups that were around at the time. Again, I didn't listen to a whole lot. I was listening to mostly like dirty garage rock at the time, but whatever.
Yeah. So this wasn't really on our radars at all in 2003 for either of us. So this was a different kind of music than we were used to. I mean, I think we were almost discouraged from listening to this kind of stuff growing up, or hip hop in general.
Oh, no, I listened to DC Talk.
Yes, I do remember that.
And the JC Crew. I had a cassette tape.
Oh man.
Christian easy listening hip hop was okay, marginally.
I do remember listening to the local hip hop channel,
107.3 FM, KFFM.
107.3. Yeah. And they had a contest where they would play so many songs, and if you could call in and tell them the songs in order that they played, then you would win something. So I remember writing down, I forget, somebody will know what year it was, but Vanilla Ice and MC Hammer were both like some of the top songs. And I remember writing those down. Okay. And getting in trouble for listening to those and trying to win a prize on the radio. Not really getting in trouble, but getting questioned about it. So it was just not on our radar at all. Yeah.
So did you have any favorites on the album?
Honestly, I think that Patiently Waiting was my favorite. Into Club obviously is a classic that is catchy. But I think I know what you're going to say is your favorite.
Oh yeah? What's that?
Well, didn't you like PIMP?
So yeah, that is one of my top 3 are probably Patiently Waiting, Heat, which I already mentioned, and PIMP. And part of that is like the song is fine, but if you watched last year's Anatomy of a Fall, great movie, was a nominee for Best Picture, did not win, but I think won Best Original Screenplay at the Oscars last year. Fantastic movie, and the instrumental version of PIMP is very important in that movie and plays a lot. And so once I heard that, it just brought the whole movie back, and it's a jam, All
right, so what kind of grade did you give this?
So it's, again, I don't have a lot of context. This one's a B- for me. I couldn't go below that because any album that produces a single as classic as Into Club that has introduced the phrase "Go Shorty, it's your birthday" into the lexicon, I mean, that is a classic album. Most albums don't even have one phrase that gets remembered 5 years later, and here we are more than 2 decades later, and everybody still knows "Go Shorty, it's your birthday. We're gonna party like it's your birthday." So given that, B- is the absolute lowest I could go.
I felt like I could go a little bit lower. But then again, my ratings have been kind of all over the place for everything. So, I mean, giving anywhere from an A to a D so far. I have a D written down for this.
Okay, yeah.
I rate things pretty emotionally, I think, and I just didn't feel this one. never could get into it that much. I wanted to, but it's just not for me. So I'm giving this a D. I don't want to start beef with 50 Cent or anything, but
if you can
that's just where I'm at.
If you can stomach it, go back and listen to it thinking about him as a super villain. And if you actually look at the cover of his second album, he's literally drawn as a comic book character. So really playing into this, like instead of a guy talking about what his experience has been, that's what helped me get on board with this album, was thinking of this badass character talking about this fake life or exaggerated life, and that's what got me on board.
And I guess however you go into something, that's going to really determine how you feel about it. So I know I went into this feeling like I already wasn't crazy about it, so that kind of affected how I felt throughout listening to it as well.
Well,
so.
I mean, the lyrics are rough. They're misogynist. They're violent. They're homophobic. Like all these things that a bad guy does. And so if you just think about it, that's who this guy is. I was able to listen.
Fair enough. I like that. Okay. Well, we got, I guess, 2 more things to talk about, even though they're essentially the same thing. But our 2003 top grossing book, or was The Da Vinci Code. Now, I didn't read this in 2003, but I think most people did. It was kind of the book that non-book readers read at this time, if you weren't reading Harry Potter, that is. Even a lot of people that read Harry Potter were reading this too. But so this is the Dan Brown novel. Features Robert Langdon as the main character. Kind of tells a story of Robert Langdon and Sophie Nouveau, who are, well, she's a cryptologist, I guess, I guess that's right.
Cryptologist,
yeah. And they are roped into trying to solve this mystery of what essentially ends up being the Holy Grail and all the society that protects the Holy Grail. So that's kind of the general plot, but there's obviously a lot that goes into this. But it was a pretty phenomenal book at the time because, like I said, everybody was reading this book. Now, the Catholic Church wasn't crazy about this book and didn't want people to read this book and came out against this book, but I remember like a lot of people just being engrossed in this for a day or two because that's how longer it took to read. So it was a big thing in 2003. Maybe not the top grossing book, but it is the top grossing book on the list of the ALA,
American Library Association bestsellers or something, which deliberately does not include Harry Potter books because those were considered youth fiction.
And I think, were they though?
They were considered that.
At the time they weren't, but let's talk a little bit about the book first, and then we can kind of discuss that whole dilemma there of Harry Potter, because that's a big thing.
So I did read this book in 2003. I believe that my wife and I read it aloud to each other in that post-childbirth fog where you got to do something to stay awake, at least until a reasonable time to try to go to sleep. And so we read it together. Again, it's a real quick read. And I would say even a month after that, I remembered nothing about it, almost. Aside from the very general plot that you just talked about, that there's the Holy Grail and they got to solve this mystery. And after rereading it, I don't think it was just because I was sleep deprived. It is incredibly unmemorable. I hated this book.
Oh, 8. Wow. Okay. All right. I didn't hate it. I went into this a little bit. Well, I went into this not knowing a whole lot because I didn't ever see the movie before this either. I didn't read it back in the day, but I went into it knowing that it was a hugely popular thing. But I went, I kind of knew essentially the story, but I did not hate this book. I think we're going to differ quite a bit on some opinions here because I had the question throughout, what makes a book good? And now the easy answers are like, okay, yeah, it has relatable characters, it has an engaging story. This didn't have those. The characters were or easily forgettable. The story was too coincidental but this qualifies, I think, as a decent book because of how. Okay, so I knew I was going to struggle with having to describe this. So I think this. I'm sorry. It engaged the readers for a very quick read. And I think that is just as important to make a good book as it is to have good characters and good stories. It's engaging, just the formula. I think that's the most important word. Is it was very much a formula book that got you to read and keep reading. So is that what makes something, can that qualify as being good? I know your opinion on that, but what do you think?
I think that could qualify as being good. This book is not it. This book is just...
You don't think so?
It's just too dumb. I'm not saying that Dan Brown is dumb. In fact, I think he's pretty darn smart because he's extremely rich. I do not think he's a good writer. And maybe that's on purpose. So this book, the first thing right off the bat that started driving me nuts was how repetitive it is. It's like, oh, Robert Langdon noticed that the chief Bezu Foch was wearing a crucifix gemata, which is and then it goes on to describe exactly what that is. Oh, it's a crucifix pin with lots of gems on it. And then a page later, just in case you forgot, he's like, oh, Captain Foch, I noticed you have this crucifix gemata on. And I'm like, give me a freaking break, man. We're not stupid. Although maybe, like you said, this book was maybe written for people that don't read books.
I think so.
And it just kept being repetitive, and the puzzles, essentially this is like they solve a bunch of puzzles together, right? Yeah. It's like not even Encyclopedia Brown level. They're just the stupidest, most obvious puzzles. And so I was struggling with it, but like I said, it's a fast read, and the chapters all end on cliffhangers essentially, and the chapters are all really short. So it's got this momentum that keeps you going. And there's this one part, and I'm sorry for those of you that haven't read it, I'm going to do a little bit of spoiling. But they find this, they go to a bank and there's a shootout and all this ridiculous stuff that happens. And they find this cryptex, a little puzzle box that you got to line up 5 letters. And then it'll open, like it's like a video game kind of thing, right? You solve the puzzle, or an escape room kind of thing. And there's this clue, this little 4-line poem written in iambic pentameter, which they go on and on about how important this. Oh my God. And the puzzle says something about this stone head that people worship, and it says the Atbash, and it says that the clue or the solution is an ancient word of wisdom. So they go through like 7 chapters talking about how they're going to solve this thing. Like, oh, this stone head is probably like the goat god Baphomet that the priory of Sion, like, and so then we'll take the Atbash cipher and change it into Aramaic, and Baphomet would turn into, guess what? Sophia, which is ancient Greek for wisdom. They didn't need any of the rest of that stuff. Just the very first line in the poem, this ancient word of wisdom is the key. Like,
which is also her name.
Right, which is also the character's name. And so I'm like, you guys are idiots. Like, why would you not just try Latin and Greek for wisdom? Oh, solved it. You didn't have to do this ridiculous series of extreme leaps to conclusions that just happened to be right. Oh man, at that point is where I was completely off board with this book. The rest of it was just like, give me a frickin' break.
Yeah, there was a lot of, it didn't take much to solve these problem or these things, but always having the threat of, oh no, something bad is going to happen. Oh, these guys are chasing us. There has to be something moving it forward. And it just felt like there's just this force just pushing the story along the whole way that really wasn't ever really a real threat. And
you mean
you're
the
absolutely right. Like, yeah. And all the puzzles were like, oh, okay, yeah, good job. You're a cryptologist and a symbologist, and you couldn't figure this out pretty much instantly. That wasn't real believable.
When the very first one was an anagram. That's like
Yeah.
sub Nancy Drew level, right?
Yeah, that was, yeah.
And then, of course, the anagram said the Mona Lisa, of course, in English. I'm getting upset thinking about it again. I can't believe I spent the hours reading this book. And guess what the final clue was? Because when they opened the mystery box, guess what's inside of it? Another mystery box, a black one inside of a white one, because that symbolizes the ancient feminine and the ancient masculine. Well, give me a break. And so this one is about Isaac Newton. What's the first thing that somebody thinks of when they think of Isaac Newton? Maybe the second thing. First, gravity. Second, oh yeah, the apple fell on his head. There was even a show on PBS called Newton's Apple.
There was. I remember that.
Guess what the solution to this frickin' mystery box was?
Apple.
Yes. Oh my God. And then it turns out that the whole plot of the albino monk and these guys, the Catholic Church chasing them because they didn't want the truth of the Grail to be revealed, wasn't even real. It was all a hoax. Well, I mean, a manipulation maybe more than a hoax.
Yeah, there was a lot of story that was nothing, or a nothing burger. That's very true.
It ended up not mattering at all.
Yeah, it all ended up coming down to one character that was manipulating everything in the entire book. And
like one step ahead of everybody all the time somehow.
Yeah, that guy is pretty impressive, I guess. But not that impressive at all, because he still ended up losing. But yeah, so I guess I looked at this as, hey, here's a book that got a lot of people reading, or had a lot of people read it, and was quick, simple, formulaic. Now, I do want to mention, I don't know if you had a chance to read the review Dave Barry left on this book.
I did not.
Oh man, it was so good. He said something like, I came up with based on this book, I came up with an idea for a best-selling novel, but it's about something else. And he went into a little bit, like, he started telling the story, and at one point part of his review was, and then something happened, but I'm not going to tell you because it's the end of the chapter. He was just like writing a book that was just so blatantly obvious, just cliffhangers all the time. But they're not even cliffhangers, just like, oh, there's something else still coming. But I think that was the main part of the formula, in that you had to just keep reading. Like, well, I can't stop here because this isn't a good stopping point because there's something still happening. Like, usually in a book, I'll read to the end of a chapter or something and then take a break if it's a good stopping point, which it usually is. But in this book, there wasn't any good stopping points because things were always happening, even though they were essentially nothing. But things were constantly going on. And I think that's why so many people read it and so would read it in a weekend. I think I took 3 days to read this over just a couple hours each day. It went pretty quick read. I mean, it has 105 chapters when you're like, whoa, 105 chapters. But when you think about it, they're average 3 or 4 pages per chapter. It's constant short little minuets that kind of just all tie together and keep you going. So
I think if an average speed reader read this straight through, it happens about in real time.
Probably.
Starts around 11 p.m., 11 p.m. one night, and is wrapped up the next morning by 10 a.m. So if you can plow through this thing in 12 straight hours, the story is happening as you read it. And there is some appeal to that. I get it. And I was in the same thing. I just kept reading it and kept reading it. I wanted to put it down, and maybe 10, 12 years ago, I read a book all the way to the end that was so bad, I promised never to do that again. If I hate it, don't read it. But thanks to this podcast, I had to get all the way through this one. That book, if you're wondering, is Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. I wouldn't recommend that to my worst enemy.
Or would you recommend it to your worst enemy?
No, I don't hate anybody that bad.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess when you don't really have enemies that you hate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was a formula. That's my best takeaway from this. It was a formula Dan Brown stumbled on, and it worked for him. He made a lot of money with this. Wasn't good, but it worked for him.
I think I've read a couple of other Dan Brown books that I read shortly after this one because, again, with the sleep deprivation of a newborn, I wanted this really easy to read stuff. I don't remember anything about any of them, but I have to think that he is a better writer than these books. Because I think that, like you said, he stumbled on this formula and it works really well. And so you kind of dumb it down a little bit, make it really momentumful, so you just keep plowing through. So you don't really have to pay that close of attention. It's almost like watching a Netflix movie while you're scrolling on your phone. You can pay half attention to your reading this book while you're sitting on the beach on vacation or something, and you still enjoy it. And so he really nailed it with this formula. I do not like it, but I get it. And he's way richer than I am, so.
If you're writing books to make money, that's what you need to do. That's how it works. You find the formula and you stick with it. But I think, like you said, you have to be a decent writer to be able to stick with this kind of formula. I would love to see something outside of this formula that he could do, and maybe a different set of ideas too would be interesting, because most of his books are on this whole symbols and the church and all that kind of stuff. So I haven't read any of his other ones, but it sounds like they're all pretty in line with that.
Yeah, people love conspiracy theories. Do we want to reveal what the Holy Grail turns out to be?
I mean, if you haven't seen the movie or read the book by now, too bad for you, because the movie came out in 2006, so it's already been 18 years since that. So what is the Holy Grail?
Here's the big secret that has been fought to protect for thousands of years. Jesus of Nazareth had a family with Mary Magdalene. And the descendants of this bloodline are still alive today.
And they might even be characters in this movie. Or a book. I'm already moving on to the movie.
Well, I actually got really annoyed about that part too when you get to the end, because it's very clearly a possibility early on in the book, and that's just rejected. Right? Like, oh no, that can't be. That's not true. And then they bring it up at the end. Oh, guess what? Your family changed their name, and it is true.
Oh, surprise! Like everything else in the book.
Once again, I left shaking my head like, give me a break. Although, I family reunion after like long time apart scenes in movies and books, they always get to me. I love them. Like, it's great. Sophie gets to see her grandmother, who she hasn't seen in 30 years, 25 years. Her twin brother or her older brothers, they get reunited, and those are always really touching, even if it's not earned. And it's not really earned here, but I'm a sucker for that kind of crap.
Yeah. And when it happened at the end of the book, I was like, okay, it's just more of the same formula, but yeah, it's nice. It's nice. That's all. It's nice. All right. So what'd you give this book before we move on and talk about the movie real quick?
It's not an F, because I've read Fs and it's not that bad. This is a D- for me.
Okay. It's kind of funny that I went the other way with the music. I'm giving this a B- only in that it's engagement. That's its main characteristic here. And it got people rating, and I mean, I'm sure some people stumbled into the whole conspiracy theory after this and started looking into things, and I mean that's fine, but I just felt like it was simple enough and engaging enough that as long as it can keep people reading, it can't be a horrible book. And it comes close to being horrible, but it's not.
Once again, we find the book being the most idiosyncratic. How people feel about books is a very personal thing.
I agree. Yep, that's where we landed last time too. All right. Do we need to take a whole lot of time talking about the movie though?
The only disappointment I have about the movie is that it starred Tom Hanks as Robert Langdon instead of Harrison Ford, because Harrison Ford was actually called out in the book. Robert Langdon was described as Harrison Ford and Harris Tweed.
That's true. It's true.
That was a little painful thing, but that was supposed to be poorly written news magazine article, I think.
That's
featured
right.
Him.
Yeah. I forgot about that, but yeah, you're right. My only problem with one of my problems with the movie was not Tom Hanks, but his hair. Tom Hanks with long hair doesn't work. I'm just gonna say it. I felt like Tom Hanks was actually a decent pick for the role here because Robert Langdon in the book kind of comes off as a little dorky, and I feel like Tom Hanks did a good job of that. He can be dorky for sure, and so I felt like his role was as good as it was going to be for this book adaptation. So, yeah.
Okay. I'll say that Tom Hanks with long hair when he's stranded on an island with the volleyball best friend is okay.
Yeah, that one works.
Yeah, the costuming in this one was not great. And the movie, I think it's better than the book because they cut a lot of stuff out. They just made it even quicker.
They did, yeah.
Kept the story almost entirely intact. It was clear enough. Watching it right after reading the book, I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, it's the same thing. They didn't like spice it up.
Yeah. I'm finding with doing this podcast that I'm struggling to watch the movie after reading the book because I have all these details in my head already of everything that happened in the book, and then the movie doesn't have a lot of them. I'm just like, they cut out a huge part. Like in the movie, there was only one cryptex instead of two, which didn't matter. But it's like they took out a whole section of it. But like you said, there was not any need for two cryptex in the book either. So, yeah, it was a fine movie, and I know a lot of people really liked the movie because it was just like the book, constantly moving forward. So there wasn't any downtime.
Well, I did start liking the movie more about halfway through when they show up at Sir Lee Teabing's house, and
because it's got Ian McKellen.
It's freaking Gandalf. It's Ian McKellen, and I did not see the cast list before I watched the movie. And I love it whenever he shows up in a movie. He's fantastic. He's fantastic here too.
Yeah, his role was definitely the best in the movie. I felt like there was a lot of more unknown actors in this that I didn't really know and then know anything about and didn't really care about throughout the movie just because they were not exciting characters and didn't really do much. But Ian McKellen, it's kind of funny that he was in both of the movies that we watched for this week.
Yeah.
Or this episode. But yeah, he's just such a good actor.
I will say I did like Jean Reno as Captain Foch of the DCPJ. Okay. I thought he did a good job, and I've seen him in a bunch of movies. He's got a new one coming out called My Friend the Penguin, I think. It looks like a touching penguin movie that doesn't feature.
Wait, is it about touching penguins or like
partially
a touching movie about
both? He befriends a penguin, but it's a penguin movie that doesn't star Elijah Wood or Morgan Freeman, and I don't think I've ever watched one.
Wait, I have. I've watched one with Jim Carrey.
A penguin movie with Jim Carrey?
Yeah, isn't he the star in Mr. Popper's Penguins? The film adaptation of the book?
Oh my gosh. You're right.
Whoa, I don't know why that came to mind, but I knew that.
Wow. That's a deep cut right there. Well, for me,
I guess so. We're a little off track anyway, but that's okay. Yeah. So, yeah, the movie was fine. It was told the story essentially the same way, few things different, but the only thing that I felt like switched dramatically was the ending. I felt like the ending of the book kind of fit with the rest of the story. This one is just like, oh yeah, and then there's this, yeah, this is part of it too. So there was enough difference between that I was like, I don't like how they changed that. They didn't necessarily need to, because they could have just went back. But I guess in the movie they didn't develop the story of Sophie's family being killed so much. I don't know. I felt like it was unnecessary change from the movie from the book to the movie. So
yeah, and one of the things they cut out from the movie was the really in-depth discussion of the Priory of Sion and who these people are, who this organization is, what they do, and then suddenly they all show up at Rosalind Chapel at the end because their idol, Sophie, is there. I mean, she is the Holy Grail, right? And so, yeah, the ending was weird to me, although it did finally wrap up in the exact same place in the Louvre where we're led to believe the true Holy Grail, the sarcophagus of Mary Magdalene, is buried underneath the Pyramide in Versailles.
The eyesore of all of France. Or I forget how he says it. So, sounds like you like the movie better than the book, though. Well, you explicitly said that, so it's not like it just sounds like it. You actually said that. So what kind of grade did you give the movie?
The movie's a C+. I didn't love it. I feel like this is the kind of movie that there used to be 3 or 4 of these playing in theaters all the time. A B-, C+, go see it and forget about it. Thriller or romance or a little bit of both. So I do kind of miss that. I can't just go to the theater tonight and see a movie like this and go see freaking Wolverine versus Deadpool or whatever it's called.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be seeing that one, honestly. But I gave this a C. I actually like the book more than the movie just because I like all the extra details that are in the book. And I'm a pretty simple man sometimes. And the book was just a little bit better than the movie for me. But they were both right there, not great, but they are pieces of media to consume.
This was content creation before the era of content creators.
Exactly. Yep.
So yeah, this one is kind of unique because I did like the movie more than the book, and there's not very many out there like that. I can think of a couple. Like, I liked Jurassic Park, the movie, better than the book. The book's fine, but the movie is incredible.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, am I going to list 2 Steven Spielberg movies? Because the other one I was thinking of was Jaws. The book is kind of weird and dumb, but the movie is incredible.
So maybe Steven Spielberg just has a way to take books and just make them magical. Maybe.
I mean, maybe that's it.
Hey, so wait, we need to go back for a minute, and we need to talk about Harry Potter a little bit. We only briefly mentioned this, but Harry Potter was, I mean, even more of a phenomenon than the Da Vinci Code. And the same year Da Vinci Code came out, the Order of the Phoenix was released, which was the 4th book in the series?
5th book.
Or 5th. 5th, okay. And I think you mentioned last episode that it actually sold more copies than the Da Vinci Code.
I think
in the first day.
Yeah, I think it sold more copies in the first day. I was standing in line at midnight in Moses Lake, Washington, at the bookstore.
You were one of them, huh?
Books A Million. Yeah, it was fun. That was also. Oh no, never mind. I was gonna go somewhere else with that, but yeah, it was an incredible phenomenon. But the only problem is if we counted those towards the best-selling books, we just read Harry Potter for 7 of the years that we're looking at.
Well, but to be fair, that's going to be true of Michael Crichton as well. So.
Oh yeah, okay.
But I looked up some information because I wasn't ever really into Harry Potter. I think I've read a couple of them. I know that might be sacrilege to so many people, but I just wasn't ever really for me, and I don't think I've even seen all the movies. So take that as you will. So this wasn't my realm, just like Da Vinci Code wasn't either. I don't know what was my thing back then. But anyway, So I was looking into it. The first 3 Harry Potter books in 2000 were at first, second, and third on the bestseller list. Before they made some changes and said, "Hey, wait a minute. These books are too powerful. Let's make a children's literature top grossing." Well, then it just dominated that as well.
Right, but that's like the minor leagues, and so it's okay.
But no, it wasn't okay. That was the thing. Because then they even had to make a new list from there. Not even the children's top grossing. They had to make another exception for Harry Potter because it just dominated that as well and wasn't letting new authors get exposed on this list. So they had to make a new list for book series, top grossing book series. And they took it off the top grossing individual books and put them onto the series, or this list that's the top grossing series. So it's like this set of books was just so massively popular that it just dominated everything.
I mean, as far as I know, it's the only book series that's ever turned its author into a billionaire.
Yeah, and it's just crazy that in all the history of literature, or however long they were keeping track of top grossing, they had to stop what they were doing and just change. Say, nope, sorry, we can't do this anymore. You're too good. That doesn't happen very often.
I have read all the Harry Potter books, probably multiple times between reading them myself and reading them to the kids. I remember the first one I read would have been back in 2002. Just graduated from college, and my younger sister-in-law recommended them, and I was like, that's a kid's book. I'm not reading that. I was a bit of a literature snob at the time. Probably I still am, to be honest. And so it's like, I don't want to read that. And then I ran out of other stuff to read, so I picked one up at an airport while I was traveling for work and read it, and it's a compelling and fun book. So I quickly read all 4 that were available at the time. And then I recommended them to my wife, and she had the same idea as I did originally. She was like, really? You want me to read a kid's book? Fine. If you and my sister are both recommending it. And then she stayed up for like 5 days in a row, just reading all of the first 4 books. We actually, I remember, drove to Walmart at like 10 p.m. to buy a copy of the Goblet of Fire because I'd borrowed it from somebody else, and so I didn't have it anymore. Because she just finished The Prisoner of Azkaban and wanted to read the next one. So they are very compelling books, and I totally get why they dominated everything. I think it's a little bit unfair to J.K. Rowling that they changed the rules.
Oh, absolutely it is, yeah. I do want to point out, though, that, like, as of the most current update, the Da Vinci Code with the movie that went along with it has actually sold more copies than Order of the Phoenix.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I think I read something that said when the Da Vinci Code movie came out and people went and saw that, then they wanted to read the book. Of course, there's a correlation there. But total number for Da Vinci Code now is sitting right around 80 million sold, whereas Order of the Phoenix is right around 65 million. I know, crazy.
These are some huge numbers.
They really are. I mean, obviously, the Chamber of Secrets, I think that's sitting at like 120 million sold or something like that. But yeah, so as a whole, Harry Potter is massively so far ahead of anything else. But those 2 books that came out in 2003, Da Vinci Code has sold more as of now, at least.
Wow. Well, maybe we should do a special episode, get you to read the Harry Potter books sometime.
If I'm not too caught up reading these other things that we are looking at, then that's something that's definitely on my radar for consuming.
All right. Well, what are we looking at next week? What are you reading next?
So I got it today from the library, actually. It finally came in. It'd been on hold for like 3 days before it got to the library. We are reading Shirley Hazard, I believe is her name, The Great Fire. It's not about the Chicago fire. It's a different story, and I'm excited to get into it. And probably going to have some downtime when I'm at the beach this weekend and dig into it a little bit. So I'm forward to that.
I'm about 12 pages in so far, and it is very different.
Oh, wow.
Very different read than the Da Vinci Code.
It's not just a formula?
No, but The Great Fire was the National Book Award winner for fiction in 2003.
Yes.
So our next episode will be all about those award winners.
And not surprisingly, the Best Picture winner we already discussed was Return of the King. So we'll just be we'll talk about it a little bit more next episode, but we'll mostly be focusing in on the other nominees, which, to be fair, are also some very good movies.
Yeah, this is the first year we've talked about where I've seen all 5 of the Best Picture nominees before we even got to this year, before we even started to talk about it.
I think there was one or two I think just one that I hadn't seen. So
what are they? What are we talking about next time?
Man, I don't have that list in front of me.
All right, well, we are talking about Mystic River, Lost in Translation, Seabiscuit, and Master and Commander at the Edge of the World, or whatever that one's called, with Russell Crowe.
I do have a film studies friend who actually majored in film studies that says Master and Commander is one of his top 25 of all time. And we will be looking at, 2 albums, kind of, but one album. Not really. It's 2 albums, but it is Speaker Box and The Love Below by Outkast. So the Big Boy album and the Andre 3000 album that are kind of tied together for the winner for the best album of the year. I'm excited to dig into that one.
I've been listening to it over the last week, and I'm absolutely hooked.
Yeah, you know some of the songs already before we even start talking about it. You know Hey Ya. Of course, everybody does that was alive in 2003. So, yeah, I think it'll be a much more fun album than the 50 Cent album, but I definitely have more exposure to this one than I did to 50's music.
Yeah, so that's next episode.
Yeah. Excited to get into the book and watch some of these other movies now.
Yeah, reminder to get a hold of us if you want at whatwasgoodpod@gmail.com or on Twitter at whatwasgoodpod. Always happy to hear from any listeners if they exist. And
yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe next episode we'll be able to talk baseball again, depending on the occurrences prior to the trade deadline here at the end of July.
I mean, we've already got one that's come through. I'm not quite entirely sure how to say his last name, but Mariners picked up Randy Arozarena. Is that what his name is? From the Rays? So
Yep.
I hope that's something, but I'm not sure if it's enough to move the needle for the Mariners. And
it's not enough to get me to talk about them.
Nope,
more,
not yet.
Couple more, and I could get on board with mentioning them on the podcast again up front, rather than here at the end when no one's stuck around this long.
Yep, I agree 100%. But that's for next time, hopefully. But until then, thanks for checking the podcast out, and we'll see you again next time.
Bye.